Computers need to transmit data between IT systems. In order to transmit data though, we need to connect the different devices that need to communicate. Transmitting data can be done either through physical wires or wirelessly, with different methods providing their own benefits and limitations. Wired connections are where we have a physical cable that connects our computer system to the network, and data will be sent and received by a computer along this cable. There are a number of different wired connection modes, but by far the most common is Ethernet. Ethernet is a set of protocols used in wired networks. The protocol is as follows. A device cannot transmit data if the network is being used by another device. It waits until the network is free before transmitting data. If two devices transmit data at the same time, a collision happens. Both devices will wait a random amount of time before transmitting data again. Ethernet will break data into chunks called frames. Each frame has a destination MAC address, source MAC address, the data being transmitted, and some error checking code known as a frame check sequence, or FCS for short. While Ethernet is really a set of protocols rather than a type of cable, we often use it interchangeably with the twisted pair copper cables we use in networking. The most common forms of this are Cat5, Cat5e, and Cat6 Ethernet cables. These twisted pair copper cables are the most common wired connection used in local area networks. Within local area networks, it is more common to see wired connections like Cat5 cables used in desktop computers, as these devices often have Ethernet ports for this type of cable and often don't have wireless capabilities built in. In a business office setting, wired connections are also more popular than wireless due to their better security, reliability, and speed. Fiber optic cable is a connection method where data is transferred through the use of pulses of light. The cable itself is made of tiny reflective glass or plastic fibers. The light pulses bounce off the reflective surface to transmit down the cable. This is the most common type of connection used in wide area networks. For example, it's used to provide super fast broadband connections to home and businesses. This is due to its much greater speed and the greater range it can transmit data when compared to copper cables. Generally, we see it used at the center of our telephone communications network. It can also be used for local area networks within a business, however, this is relatively rare due to the increased cost involved with setting up a fiber optic network. Fiber optic cables can use the Ethernet protocols for transmitting data. The advantages of wired connections are that wired connections are generally faster than wireless. Twisted pair Ethernet cable can have speeds of up to 10 gigabits per second compared to 1 gigabit per second on Wi-Fi. It is a very reliable connection method as they are not as susceptible to interference from other radio signals like wireless methods can be. It usually has a greater transmission range than wireless, especially due to the issue of interference that wireless methods suffer from. And it is more secure than wireless methods as it is easier to connect to and intercept data on a wireless network. Wired networks need you to be able to actually access a physical cable. However, the disadvantages of wired connections are that, compared to wireless methods, it offers limited mobility as you need to have a physical wire running from your computer to the connection point. And many modern computer devices no longer have connection ports for Ethernet cables, making them incompatible with an Ethernet network. Wireless connection methods allow us to transmit and receive data over a network without having to plug a physical cable into our devices. When it comes to wireless networking, we most commonly think of Wi-Fi. This is actually a set of protocols, much like Ethernet is a set of protocols for wired connections, and the connection method used by Wi-Fi is radio signals. Still, in many regards we consider them one and the same when thinking about wireless networks. Wi-Fi is a set of protocols for how wireless devices communicate with the network. If you have a Wi-Fi network, you will need a wireless access point that allows your wireless device to communicate with the network. Wi-Fi is broken down into two frequency bands. 2.4 GHz and 5 GHz. You can think of these like motorways. The 2.4 GHz band has 11 lanes, but they all overlap. The only lanes that don't overlap are lanes 1, 6 and 11. This means that the 2.4 GHz Wi-Fi band has 3 non-overlapping channels. This means if you are using channel 1 and your neighbour uses channel 3, it's like you are both driving down the same lane in the motorway and you will slow each other down. You will need to move to either channel 6 or 11. The 5 GHz band has 23 non-overlapping channels as it is a lot wider. However, your devices need to be closer to the wireless access point and only newer devices can connect to the 5 GHz frequency. Wi-Fi is the most common technology for connecting wirelessly to a local area network. It is particularly popular with mobile devices such as smartphones, tablets and laptops, as these devices rely on portability and also rarely have an Ethernet port built in. Within the home, Wi-Fi is more popular than a wired Ethernet network, as running cables through the home can be quite difficult without extensive labour or creating dangerous trip hazards. The advantages of wireless connections are that wireless connections tend to be cheaper than wired ones, as you don't need to pay for large quantities of cabling. It is easy to connect new devices to the network, as you don't need to find an open network port and run cabling through the building. And it allows for freedom of movement, as you aren't tied to a cable. You can easily take your device around with you and still be connected. However, the disadvantages of wireless connections are that wireless connections tend to have small maximum ranges and are susceptible to interference, which makes the connection even shorter and unreliable. Data transfer speeds for most wireless connections tend to be slower than wired connections, and security can be a big issue, as it is easy for a malicious user to connect to a wireless network without detection and intercept data. So, Ethernet is a protocol for wired networking where a device can only use a network if it is free. If two devices transmit at the same time, they wait a random amount of time before retransmitting. Ethernet breaks data into frames with a source and destination MAC address, data, and error check. Copper cable is used in wired LANs due to computers having built-in compatible ports. They're also lower cost. Fiber optic cables are commonly used in WANs due to their high speed and large range. Generally, wired connections are faster, more reliable, and have a greater range and are more secure than wireless connections. Wi-Fi is a set of protocols or rules for how wireless devices communicate with the network. Wi-Fi is broken up into the 2.4 GHz and 5 GHz frequencies. Wi-Fi is popular with wireless LANs, particularly when working with portable devices. Generally, wireless connections are cheaper, easier to set up, and allow for easier movement than wired connections.